I'm Jere Behrman. I'm a professor of economics and sociology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I've been working in Latin America for many decades, and recent decades with considerable emphasis on the early part of life, on early childhood development. Early childhood development is particularly important because in the early stages of life, biologically, children are still developing very rapidly. So what happens in those early stages of biological development sets the stage for what can happen later. If a child is poorly nourished or receives little stimulation when the child is very young, this is likely to have impacts over the life cycle. It's likely to result in less learning in school, probably less duration of schooling, and even less productivity as adults, whether we're talking about productivity in the labor force or as parents. So while you were interested in children's well-being and they having cheerful, healthy lives no matter what, in addition to that interest, there are important long-run economic productivity effects of better early childhood development. I think it's very important for governments to prioritize, and I think there's no single answer which applies to the whole region. That's because the conditions of early childhood development vary substantially in different parts of the region. Perhaps the most important difference is the extent to which malnourishment is a problem. There are parts of the region, the Andean parts of, say, Guatemala, where early life malnourishment is a big problem. It has implications for all sorts of dimensions of life, being able to pay attention for neural development, and these will affect negatively how the child develops over his or her life cycle. In those kinds of contexts, ways of dealing directly with the problem of malnourishment should be very high priority. Those include, of course, improved nutrition. It may include improved knowledge of parents, particularly mothers, about feeding their children. It also is likely to include improved water and sanitation, or ways of dealing with water supplies and sanitation supplies. Those are important because of the interaction between the state of malnourishment and infectious diseases. But in other parts of the region, thankfully, malnutrition is not such a major problem. In some parts, for example, Chile, the levels of malnutrition are very low by global standards, low relative, say, to the United States and some other developed countries. They're more or less the same order of magnitude. While there's individual children in those contexts for whom better nutrition is important, for most children, there's a foundation in terms of basic health and nutrition on which to build, and resources should be directed towards improving the stimulation of the children. That may take the form of educating parents better how to provide stimulation to their children, or it may take the form of preschool programs which provide such stimulation. That stimulation should take the form of cognitive stimulation, but also in the context of structured play, teaching the children how to have self-control and self-discipline, how to interact with their playmates. Those are skills which, like cognitive skills, are going to be very important in the long-run productivity of the children of the region. As your question suggests, there's been more studies of early childhood development in the United States in particular, and somewhat in other developed countries, than in the region, but there are some in the region. The studies in the developed countries, I think, have some very important implications. Primarily, perhaps, that changing the nature of early life has important and substantial implications over the life cycle. As the children become school age, as they pass through school and become young adults, even as they become mature adults or aging adults. There's evidence from the U.S. programs that although there sometimes are not strong effects that can be measured in a few years, there are some important effects that can be measured over a few decades. For example, a famous program in the U.S. context is the Perry School program. In this program, interestingly, initially it looked like there were some big effects on cognitive skills of children, but those tended to seem to fade away. There was disappointment and surprise. But as the children were followed and became older, say in their 20s, it turned out that there were some very important effects. In this case, reduced criminality. Effects which, because the children had better options, not only did they fare better, but society fared better as a result of these programs. In the region, most of the studies have focused on fairly short-run impacts of early childhood development programs, and they show some strong, promising evidence of improved cognitive skills, improved self-discipline when the children are of school age. There's a few exceptions, such as the study I mentioned before related in Guatemala, where the children are followed after 35 or 40 years, so they are more or less 40-year-old adults. In that case, there are some large impacts of better nutrition, the nutritional component of early childhood development, on wages for adults, quite substantial, about 40% increase in wages for adult Guatemalan males who had better nutrition when they were less than 36 months of age, at an annual cost of something like $30 a year, very small compared with their ultimate wage gain a number of years later. Likewise, there were similarly large impacts on the health of the children of the women who were originally the girls when the infant girls, when the nutritional supplements were provided. When they became adults and had children, their children were better in a physical sense. They were bigger, they had higher birth weight, they were less likely to be stunted. So there is evidence of an impressive intergenerational effect in that case.